Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Don't you just love this time of year? We are having a beautiful fall with lots of really nice weather and gorgeous fall colors to enjoy. So what's on tap for today? Well, I recently received my bulb order, so I'm going to plant them today, and while I'm doing it, I've got all kinds of tips to share with you. Spring flowering bulbs are planted in the fall, and I'm referring to things like tulips, daffodils, and crocuses. They need those long months of the fall and winter to develop a good root system, and then of course as temperatures start warming up in the spring, they'll send up those flower stalks that we are all looking forward to. And if you live in a cold climate like I do, that is the reward, right? So I bought my bulbs from the website of johnsheepers.com. I don't have an affiliation with them, but I've been dealing with them for years. They have a fantastic selection. They've got great customer service, and I feel like their prices are very reasonable. You can find bulbs at grocery stores, garden centers, home centers, just all over the place. And I would encourage you to add some to your garden because they really bring us a lot of joy in the spring. When purchasing bulbs, you need to take a few things into consideration. If you have a lot of problems with deer and/or gophers, you will want to avoid planting tulips because both of these types of critters think tulip bulbs, foliage, and the flowers are delicious. I should add that there are some great repellents that you can buy, such as plant skid. A lot of folks with critter problems will plant daffodils because those bulbs are poisonous, so they are rarely bothered by deer or gophers. You also want to look at the hardiness zone the bulbs will grow in. I'm in hardiness zone 5B, so there are some types that aren't even an option for me. Fortunately, there are still plenty of choices that will work in my garden. In the past 3 years, I have been focusing on purchasing bulbs that are more unusual. That's because I think they add a whole lot of interest to the garden, and I'm happy to say I've discovered that I was right because they are amazing. So here is a short slideshow of the types of bulbs that I've planted in the past 3 years. Want to see which bulbs I bought this year? As I mentioned earlier, they all came from John Sheepers, and I'd like to thank them for letting me use these 4 photos so you can see what I get to look forward to in the spring. The first is Tulipa humilis Persian Pearl. This is a species tulip, and just look at that purple with the yellow centers. It will grow 6 inches tall, and I need to plant them 4 to 5 inches deep and apart. Next up is Narcissus bulbocodium white petticoat. This is a miniature narcissus that will grow just 6 to 8 inches tall, and it blooms in April. You can plant it in full to part sun, and I'll need to plant them about 4 inches deep and apart. The next one is Crocus orange monarch. And this is a species crocus that also knocked my socks off when I was shopping for bulbs. We're all familiar with the white, yellow, and purple crocus flowers, right? Well, I've never seen orange ones before, so I'm excited to grow them. They will be 4 inches tall and will also grow in full to part sun. I'll need to plant them 4 inches deep and about 3 inches apart. And last but not least is Iris reticulata pixie. This is a rock garden iris, and look at those deep blue flowers in the foreground of this photo. Wow! I started growing rock garden irises a few years ago and quickly fell in love with them. They are so stunning, and boy are they easy to grow. They'll be about 4 to 6 inches tall and I'll want to plant the bulbs 4 inches deep and apart. Now, while that might not seem like very many bulbs, I've actually got 85 of them all together to plant, so I had better get going. I've been walking around our back garden trying to decide where I want to plant the bulbs, and there are a few things that I need to take into consideration. For one thing, because we do occasionally get deer in our front yard, I need to plant the tulips in the backyard here because it is all surrounded by a deer fence. So that's one thing I need to think about. I know I can't plant any bulbs in here because I have planted a lot. You can't see them, of course, but this bed is going to be packed with wonderful spring flowering bulbs in a few months. So this part is off limits. The cool thing is I have some new areas to plant because of our back landscaping project that we did in the spring and summer. And so I've got all sorts of new nooks and crannies to put bulbs in. Another thing I need to take into account is the height of the bulbs. As I showed you what they looked like, I mentioned their heights. And you know, if you're going to plant something that's short, you want to plant them right at the front of a bed so you can admire the view and not have it be obscured by taller plants. When you're planting your bulbs, I strongly encourage you to plant them in clumps. I typically just toss them on the ground and plant them where they are laying. And that's because it looks more natural than, say, a straight line where everything is perfectly spaced apart. Unless you have maybe a botanical garden and you're going for some type of a pattern. The other thing is make sure you plant your bulbs at the appropriate depth. There is a reason for the depth information on websites and in catalogs and on the packages of the bulbs that you've bought. So for the best success, follow the directions. Now, if you're curious about the landscaping project we were doing, it primarily involved reshaping and edging our landscape beds with steel edging, and I think it looks sharp. Yes, it was a lot of work. But the cool thing is that I got some more planting space, especially in the foreground there. You see that area where there's just soil and no plants? That is virgin territory up for grabs, and I'm going to put a couple different kinds of bulbs near the front of that curve. Now let me address some questions you might have. So what kind of tools can you use for planting bulbs? If you have a trowel, that certainly works really well. If you have some bulbs that need to be planted really deeply, you might need a tape measure or ruler or something to make sure you're planting them at the correct depth. There are also tools called bulb planters, and this is the version that you're going to push by hand down into the soil, make a hole with it, plant your bulb in the hole, and then knock the soil back into the hole from here. There's also a standing version of the same type of thing. That's where you're going to use your foot to push it down into the soil, plant your bulb, and then refill the soil in the hole. Fertilizer is another important component to planting bulbs. So when you're at a garden center, you want to look for something that is labeled as being a bulb fertilizer. And if you look at the 3 numbers on the fertilizer package, that middle number should be quite high. That represents the proportion of phosphorus in this product. And phosphorus promotes flowering and good root development. Now this also has a high number for potassium. That's the 3rd number. This one is nitrogen. And potassium is also great for good root growth. The other thing I want to mention is you do not want to put the fertilizer into your planting hole because there's a danger of burning the root zone. So it's much better to plant your bulbs, put the soil back into the holes, and then you're going to sprinkle the bulb fertilizer onto the soil surface according to the label directions. So I mentioned that I've got prime real estate here. There is nothing planted in this whole area. And obviously I want to add in some perennials next spring, but I do want to plant both some of the Persian pearl tulips and the orange monarch crocuses into this area, just a few clumps here and there. I've got 25 of each. I'm not going to plant them all in this one spot, but I do want to use a few of them, and it'll be something that'll be really nice to see in the spring. So step number one is to just toss some crocuses and a few of the bulbs. If you are new to planting bulbs this year, I wanted to mention that the general rule of thumb is to plant the pointy end up. So here is one of those Persian pearl tulip bulbs, and you can see there's a pointy end here. And here is the crocus bulb. It's a little bit differently shaped than some of the other crocuses I've planted in the past, but you can see there's a pointy end here. On the opposite end of each bulb is what's called the basal plate, and that is where the roots came out when these were growing in the ground. Now I'm going to take these two tulips. I'm a little worried about having them back here and potentially driving a trowel right through one, so I'm putting them more to the front. And the crocuses need to be 4 inches deep, and so do the tulips. And you can see this soil is really soft, and that's only because we had just recently worked with this area and added new soil to the bed. Ordinarily, I don't think I could push things into the soil that well. Now, I'm just modifying a little bit where some of these bulbs are going, and that's only because I don't want them too closely together. I'm so excited about seeing these in the spring. That's pretty easy. I'm going to do a few more of these down on that end of this area next. This is another end of the bed, and I thought it would be fun to plant some of those narcissus in this area. And only 10 came in the package, so I might as well plant them all near each other. They also go in 4 inches deep. Makes it easy to remember everything. Well, let's make sure you're planting them pointy end up. So this is where I want to plant the rock garden iris pixie, and because they are fairly petite, I want them close to the edge of the bed, and certainly where I can see them easily, because they are going to be absolutely gorgeous. Well, I'm not going to make you watch me plant the rest of the bulbs, but you get the general idea of what's important, what you want to remember to do. And above all else, be sure to plant your bulbs before the ground freezes solid, because once that happens, that's it. So I hope that this video was helpful, and I would encourage you, even if you didn't intend to plant bulbs, go to the store and pick up a package, plant them, and you will have a lovely surprise in the spring. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening.